Hey, I'm Matt from Christ the King Community Church, the pastor, and this is my friend Andrew. And we're here at Gospel Rock. Our church is actually going to be live streaming here on Sunday morning, on Resurrection Sunday at 6:15. And you could hear that on our church website or on our Facebook page. Hey, one of the things I was thinking about is just that name, Gospel Rock. That can slide off your tongue and you not think about what it actually means. But the word gospel means good news. It's a biblical reference. Like, that comes right from the Bible. The word good news, and it's regarding the message of Jesus, his death, his burial, his resurrection, and the coming of his kingdom, and the story of salvation. And so gospel means good news. This is Good News Rock. Andrew and I were yapping. He's a newbie to the coast, and relative newbie, and I'm like pretty much a lifer. I've spent most of my life here. I lived in the Port Mellon town site. I got my paw prints in the concrete at Cedar Grove School. And when I used to come to Gospel Rock when I was a kid, there was always older teenagers jumping off the rock here. So when I got to be a teenager, this is what we did. We came here, we swam, we hopped off the rock. But one of the things about Gospel Rock too is that I always remember on the front side of the rock, there was graffiti, and it was always painted on there, Jesus is Lord. It was a thing that marked Gospel Rock. And finally, sometime in the 90s, it got scrubbed out and disappeared. And I just thought, it's the name Gospel Rock. I wonder what all the history is. And you and I were yapping about it. You got a little bit of a bee in your bonnet.
I did.
Yeah.
I thought, well, there's got to be some reason that this is called Gospel Rock that has something to do with the gospel. At least that's the way I think. And before I start with what I've learned, I'm going to tell you this is not an authorized history. This is just one guy's trying to figure something out based on the name Gospel Rock. So what I learned was that back in the mid to late 1800s, the Squamish Nation had a seasonal village called Checkwell, and that was just north of Armour's Beach over here. You're probably all familiar with that piece of property. And they used the bluff, so that big rock over there, and this rock, which wasn't called Gospel Rock, I don't know what they called it, but they would come here as a lookout, both here and on the bluff, because they used to get raided by other tribes from up the north coast, and they'd come in and actually take children and women. So they'd use them for labor. So that was part of the history of this particular location being a great lookout here on the water. So the village was abandoned when successive outbreaks of smallpox ravaged it, and the inhabitants were wiped out. And they were all part of the Squamish Nation, the bigger nation, and they called them the Checkwell people that lived there. They became non-existent, and so they abandoned the village. In the late 1800s, this rocky outcropping was known as a navigational aid by mariners. So all the shipping traffic and boating traffic had come through here. Probably not that many ships, but it was known as Shepherd's Rock. So I'm not sure where Shepherd's Rock came from, but that was what the navigational aid was called. And by 1886, George Gibson has arrived in Gibson's Landing here with others, and they began settling the area. And in the early 1900s, so this is 1886 is when George Gibson settled in the Gibsons area. By the early 1900s, with the influx of settlers, there's biblically inspired messages began appearing on its face. Now, I've seen one picture on Google Images there that shows the face of Gospel Rock here with a Bible verse on the front side, so facing the water. So clearly those messages, I think, were written for mariners, not for people as Matt described on the road driving by. So both sides had that going on. And so these messages were like this. These are 3 examples of messages that were written on there. He shall be born again. Sorry, I have to read this. I didn't memorize it all. And Christ died for the ungodly. And the ever famous, the wages of sin is death.
Wow.
So pretty interesting stuff. And these phrases were kept brightly painted for years and years. And the author was unknown. But here's what we could speculate. It was around that time that these messages appearing on the rock were showing up, that the name Gospel Rock became coined within the community. So for obvious reasons they called it, because the messages on the rock were all quotes from the Bible. There is a number of these a member, of the Plymouth Brethren who lived in a cottage just actually over here to the west of Gospel Rock, where we stand right now. And everyone in the community didn't know, but they speculated that he was responsible for writing these Bible verses on the rock. And they were maintained at the time, like I said, in bright color. So that's what we've learned about the history of Gospel Rock. But there is also a couple other things I want to share. One of them is folklore. And it was that in the 1800s, there was a preacher who preached the gospel to pirate ships that were moored out here.
Wow.
And I guess what he was hoping to do was to convert the pirates. And I didn't even know there's any pirates up this far north. I mean, why would you be a pirate here when you can be in the Caribbean or something? So, so that was interesting. It's folklore, though. That's not history. The other stuff I've shared with you is somewhat documented. Of course, some of that would be verbal documentation passed on. And there's also tradition. And what's really cool is the local tradition here in Gibsons, and this is written on the town website, is that there is a local tradition of Easter services being performed at Gospel Rock for many years. So that predates CTK. I don't know if Matt here or anyone else out there is aware of other churches who have celebrated Easter here on Gospel Rock or done a sunrise service, but we're just one of at least others prior to us doing the same thing. So it's pretty cool to consider all this, and it's pretty cool to be forced into doing this kind of research because of COVID-19. So I think it's pretty neat.
Right on, Andrew. I remember when I was a kid that churches would gather here always on Easter service. Like I remember that for sunrise service when just growing up in this community. And so, you know, when I had the privilege of getting to become a pastor in this town, I'm like, that tradition has got to live on. And so our church has been coming here for about 10 years for sunrise. We haven't necessarily done it every year, but we're doing it this year. And because we can't gather, we wanted to just, you know, warm people's house and give them that feeling of a normal Easter season. And so we're gonna live stream from here on Sunday morning at 6:15. So hey man, thanks for doing all that research. That was really cool stuff.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah, right on. So thanks, Andrew. That's the history of Gospel Rock from Christ the King Community Church.